increasing cost of hardware have meant that we are fast becoming used to the world in which we have access to products, services, and experiences anytime and on demand. Thus, in this webinar session, we will discuss more on how organizations run their business that are affected by the new technology and disruption. With us right now, we have Professor Dr. Roslan Ismail, our guest speaker for today. He is a computer science professor and the head of University Kuala Lumpur MIIT. He received his PhD in computer science from Glasgow University. And Professor Dr. Roslan is also a former World Bank consultant from year 2002 to 2005 and a former senior officer at the United Nations Secretariat in New York from 1995 to 1997 and a former director of Techno-Economy at the Forest Research Institute in Kuala Lumpur from 1990 to 1995. Before we start, I have a few housekeeping items. Everyone is on mute. And if you have any question for our speaker, please feel free to enter them into a chat box session and we'll be addressing questions at the end of the session. Or you can also ask by raising your hand at the participant section of your Zoom interface. And for your information, we're also recording this and the recorded version of today's webinar will be available on demand after this live session. Okay, without any further ado, I would like to turn this over to our panel, Prof. Dr. Roslan. Prof, over to you, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much, Jalanon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you for inviting me for the next session. And I'm quite happy to be in your webinar. And of course, as I said, the title is Risk Against the Tradition.
Yeah.
Probably maybe I don't touch directly on the facility management, but basically I will give you some case studies related to that, and more on the what would be the future.
Yeah.
What would be the new technology for the future? And in what way that we can solve a particular problem. Okay, let me share my slide first. Where is my slide now? Okay. Right. Okay, this is the title given to me, Risk Against the Tradition. Given to me yesterday. So basically, I have the idea, not so much about the title, but I think more on what would be the technologies for the future. So let me say my experience. So that's why I said that a story.
Yeah.
Risk Against the Tradition is a story based on my experience working in forestry, even though I'm a computer scientist. I'm working in forestry for the last 43 years. This year, and maybe many of you basically to a certain extent looking at IT as it is now. But let me bring you a little bit, a very short period about what happened before, and then what is the current one, and what would be the future technology. Yeah. All right. Okay. Let's look at the beginning. Beginning, I give this as from 1970s to 1980, yeah, and maybe you heard about this, but basically never use it. I use it when I give lectures to UPM students. I use this punch card, and in free we have a punch card in 1970s, 1980. We have a punch card. Many people don't see it now. In 1970s, 80s, you use punch card, you use a computer Fortran, you have the purpose is more on the speed up the process. And I purchased the first computer in forestry sectors in Malaysia. It cost 400,000 mini computers, but the specification was CPU RAM is only 64 kilobyte. We have a 2 BDU, we call it BDU, monitor. And hard disk, you talk about terabyte now, it was only 10 megabyte and 5 megabyte removable disk. Okay, that was before. But that cost $100,000, ringgit. And 80s, I lived this. We started probably at that time. We talked about the personal computers. We learned C. We learned Unix. And we started having experience on artificial intelligence, expert system, and knowledge base. And in fact, it is something now coming back. Yeah, it was 1980s, but now coming back, especially on artificial intelligence now. It died a little bit, sleep a little bit, but now it's coming back.
Yeah.
So I give this one the third one. The third part is more on the internet era. In print, we started probably the first research institute in Malaysia that having internet connection. It was very excited at that time. It was we set up in 1993. We have website connection, international handphone started to be used, and only started to have an idea about e-commerce. That was in 1990s, and when I wrote the UN Secretary General report, I put the e-commerce as part of the UN Secretary General report. And maybe not in Malaysia. When I was in New York, we have experience using internet banking in 1990s. It was not yet set up in Malaysia. So that was the technology in 1990s. And sorry, internet. Then you look at what happened in year 2000, and we talk a lot more on IT and wireless. IT wireless, and in particular, now many people have full package. We have computer, we have printers. Last time we always share the printer. Yeah. Students have their own computer, laptop. You use text messages, and I was very happy. I know that Sharadon using BlackBerry. I also use BlackBerry.
Yeah.
We use a push mail. It was a very proud one. When I was in UniKL, I was the first one that using push mail.
Yeah.
So it was something new at the time.
And not many. Not many at that time use this.
Yes, that's true. Not many people using push mail at the time. And I teach e-commerce. In fact, as I mentioned that during the 90s, I introduced the e-commerce during my preparation of United Nations Secretary General report. Then, of course, Facebook started. But the last part, then we talked a lot about this WhatsApp, smartphone, and so on. Now, WhatsApp is probably the real revolution for this, because by doing that, they have a social change. You have all this grouping and people, the old people now very active using the facilities and so on. And now also starting now this year or this decade, people are started using the e-commerce, buying online, and the business also change. The business also change, and during the PKP, you can see that all this new business, Grab and others. I thought about this maybe 30 years ago, but I think the implementation of that, the application of that is now, even now in future that we talk more on e-commerce. And I think from now and the future, partly because in Malaysia is more on due to the PKP. And we talk about e-learning. It's more on virtual university. Believe me, the next 5 years or 10 years, you can see that whether we will have a real university like what we are having now. And you can see that a lot of all these online universities are coming up. And a lot of courses basically using all this YouTube and others. So it'll be a lot more. And the way that they teach also could be different. So I believe that within 5 to 10 years, these virtual universities will be there. And the concept of university will change. Now, that is the technology. That is technology. That is technology. Sorry, let me. Okay. 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 Now, Now we talk about technology. We talk about the from 1970s to year 2000. Now, I would like to just show you a little bit about the some case studies. Some case studies. And I refer to sustainable development. And of course, I give example in terms of tropical forest. But in what way that basically the impact of this IT to the sustainable development. And in this case, it's on the sustainable management of forest. You will see that because forestry sectors in Malaysia is a big sectors. And forestry sector in the world also big sectors. That is a big one. So I will show you a little bit about the what would be the impact as well as what would be the technology future. Okay, now bring back in 1980s when we talk about using personal computers and so on. During the 1980s, there were tropical deforestation in the world at that time. It was 17 million hectares being deforested. And then we had Rio 1992, Rio de Janeiro 1992, and they come up with the Agenda 21. And I was part of the 5 people who were called in the UN Secretariat to formulate what they call a forest agreement. In the United Nations. So I was there from 1995 to 1997, 1998. And of course, yeah, and all over the world, basically, we are talking about forestry, because forest is very important aspect of sectors that have a lot of impact to the sustainable development. And if you can see, there was, I don't know whether you heard this, timber certification. Now you talk about the oil palm, but before oil palm was a timber certification. They banned the import of timber from Malaysia, partly because of the talk about the deforestation. So in order to do this, then we have a timber certification. And I was involved, basically. I was involved during the 90s all over the world, basically. We talk about the promoting good management practices of the forest. So all over the world, all over the world. So I was involved in this. Now, let's see a little bit on this. Let's see a little bit on this. We talk about this all over the world now, current technology. We say that we are doing this good management practices. All over the world. That's why they issue your certificate. If they want to import timber from Malaysia or Indonesia or Brazil or from Gabon in Africa and so on, you need to carry a certificate to indicate that the timber comes from the sustainable managed forest. So I just show you here is a sort of a flow chart, system framework, how we develop the procedures and computer system and so on. But the whole thing is always based on forest inventory. This is being adopted all over the world, in Indonesia, Gabon, and other countries. And we cannot forest inventory. And at the end, we carry out what they call stock table. Stock table to indicate that how many species, what size, and so on, and how to cut the trees, what species that need to be felled, and so on. Okay. The last time they used a table in 1970s, 1980s table. But when I joined FRIM, I bought the first computer and we processed the computer and we use a formula, and this way we can speed up the whole process. Then they produce what they call stand table, stock table. And we decide what which trees that we need to cut, what size. But the rest, that's why I said that is the issue. But the rest, we do not know yet. Just an estimate in terms of the damage due to logging. Nobody can tell you exactly what would be the damage before logging. Nobody. They just talk to you about 30%. Nobody can tell you. Even until now, the kind of practices all over the world, nobody can tell you. And nobody can tell you also the growth prediction, what will happen 30 years from now. They just estimate, but very sketchy. I call it very sketchy. It's not based on the real one. Okay, now, If that is the case, what can be done? You have computer, you talk about the WhatsApp, you talk about the many other things, you talk about the satellite, you talk about that. What can be done for forestry? For forestry, what way that? What will be the future? I think the foresters stop. For the last 50 years, there is no sort of new development, except the improvement based on the manual. Based on the manual, the foresters are thinking like that, so they implement that using computer. And I was a young one, just follow computerized their thinking. So we had the current system. Now, being a computer man, then we need to keep a distance from forester. Can we think a new direction, new way of processing this? So let's see this. Let's see this now. Let's see this. So I mentioned about the problem. The problem has been in tropical forests everywhere in the world. We call it considered as good business practice, but in the real world, it's not really, giving you sustainability for the future. In my view, we need to improve this. So we thought the reason is because they use average sampling and so on. Now, this is the weaknesses of the current technology, but from the forestry perspective, I don't see that they have no solution at the moment. So I always believe that solution should come from somewhere else, outside forestry. The people who are thinking differently. I always feel that way.
Yeah.
So I had advantage because I learn forestry, I understand forestry, I know computer, I know statistics, I know economic activity here and there. So we try to combine this and we try to see doing something impossible. Something impossible. Impossible maybe 30 or 40 years ago. Now, when you look at the forest, you talk about the GIS, but really, can you map the forest?
Wow.
Can you map the forest? Sure, nobody think about it. You talk about the GIS and so on, but do you think that you can map the forest?
Not sure.
You can map the forest. Maybe not. Nobody think about it. The first time we said that this is crazy. When I started talking about this, maybe 30 years ago, they said it's crazy. Cannot be done. Not.
Yeah.
Not
what I can do is just map the contour of the hill. That's all.
That one different. That one different. That one different. This is one more difficult than that. Okay. Because in order for us to give a proper analysis, then we need to get information.
Yeah.
And this one, you cannot get information. So what they do is just like taking an average, take 10% and so on, but you don't know what is inside the forest.
Yeah. Right.
Now we can say that why don't we map the forest? So when I was attached to World Bank project in Cambodia, I started having this implementation. It's basically not in Malaysia. I started this in Cambodia, basically. I started this in Cambodia. I said, why don't we map trees 30 centimeter and above, the big one? The big one. Can we do that? Can we do that? So, meaning that we need to have a procedures, methodology, which is entirely different from the current thinking of foresters. Current thinking of foresters in all over the world. So what we did is basically we have sort of developed this technique. Of course, we cannot use, we take a GPS coordinate, but we cannot have a coordinate, GPS coordinate in the forest because there is no signal. So we need to have a new kind of method.
Yeah.
New kind of method to use to get the coordinate. So what we did is basically we have one GPS coordinate and we use the distance. And from the distance, then we convert that into coordinate. Okay. Now, from this one, of course, we can formulate the distribution of trees. And this one, basically, you can see that if you fell the trees, which trees will be damaged.
Yeah.
This is almost never think of 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 5 years ago. Okay, now, this is computer scientist lecturers going to the forest. You know that I just introduced them to the forest in Terengganu, right? So we are doing this. So we are developing the methodology for the tree mapping. That's why I said that this tree mapping is a new technology. So we are doing this. We create all the coordinate, three-dimension coordinate, three-dimension coordinate. And here, for example, if the tree is here, if the tree is here, and this is the coordinate, how we create a coordinate for the trees? How we create? Then, if the trees fell this way, then you see that which trees is going to be damaged. So, compared to the foresters now, they talk about the direction of felling. In our case, we need to go to every angle, every 5 degrees to check which is the best direction. You cannot do that for the manual, but the computer you can do that. What is the best kind of direction of felling? Okay. What I'm saying is this technology, but this technology will need to come up with the new ideas, new technique. Otherwise, there's no computer system. You have a computer, you have a machine, but the machine is still using the old traditional way. And we are developing all the software here. So I want to show this one, but just try to introduce the concept. Okay, so meaning that if you fell the trees they are going to fell is the red color, for example, and the damage is basically the green and red. The green and red is the one that will be affected, will be damaged. Okay, so it look like this. It look like this, and it also look like this in the sense that this is going to fail. So you will map out the trees that you're going to fell and the trees that they are going to damage. So if you cut these trees, for example, we can put LT1, the damaged trees will be LT2, LT3, LT4, and we give a degree of damage in terms of if it is count, we say that 50%. But it goes for the stem, die. Always die. Always die. But you need to remember that sometimes each tree will be hit by 2 felling trees. So there are many other possibilities. So you need to take care on this, all these possibilities. Now, okay. Now, if I explain to you the sequence, I said that first we carry out inventory. We cut the trees. We decide on the species. Later on, I will show you how do we decide the species. And then the species will fail. And the remaining forests, we need to simulate. The remaining forest, we need to simulate what will happen for the next 30, 40 years, whether the forest will grow, So we have a simulation for tree mapping. Nobody has done this. And I put this one PhD for this. The other one is now working on the other project. So this is one PhD on the simulation for tree mapping. So you look at the various kind of theorems and so on. Okay, in this case, you never think about this. You never think that this. How do you decide which trees are going to die? You are talking about 30 to 40 years duration. During the simulation, during the growth, can you decide which trees are going to die? Which one is going to die? Which trees are going to die?
No idea.
So you need to have a new theorem to develop this. And you know that which location of trees when you have a seedling, when is the seedling fall, for example? How far from the mother trees? But one thing problem on this, when you do the simulation like this, it takes very long time. The computer will keep quiet for the next 3, 4, 5, or 7 days.
Yeah.
So we need to have this intelligence system. This is what we are developing, intelligence system to decide which trees will, which computer software that will take a longer time, which one is shorter time. So full-blown simulation will take very long time. Very long time. It will take 3, 4 days basically on computing time. Because they are talking about hundreds of thousands of trees, and we are talking about many kind of options and so on. So they are long computing time. So we need to have a different technique. So we are using what they call a black box architecture in terms of our artificial intelligence approach to this. Okay. And you know that when you do the simulation for this kind of thing, yeah, you need to look at what happened to the seedling, what happened to sapling, what happened to the small trees, big trees, as medium tree, and small tree. So this is a cycle. So we need to simulate this to create what we call a new forest. New forest. So from the logging, it will take about 30 to 40 years. 30 to 40. Previously, they don't use this. So they just an estimate. And if you go to Terengganu, they say that after 30, 40 years, the prediction 30, 40 years ago was wrong. Was wrong. Huh? So they don't get that amount of timber. Huh?
Yeah.
They don't get that amount of timber. So I know, in fact, even before, the way that they do things is not correct. Not correct. So very simple one. Very simplistic. So, okay. And this is various kind of basically approach in order for you to create a new technique, new technology for this kind of issues. Okay. This is how we decide which trees are going to die. So we have a new theorem to do that. So I just wanted to show you that basically this is not just simply saying that, okay, we will decide, but they are studies. They are studies. They are theories. They are ideas, not only theories, they are also ideas. So just like the Asian theorems everywhere being used, but basically you should know how to use certain theorem on a certain application. Okay. And at the end of the day, you have never seen this for the last 50 years. This result to indicate that basically the green one is the production. You cut the trees. This is the production. And this is the damage and the growth. So the growth should cover the production as well as the damage. And this is 30 years, 60 years, and 90 years. This is what we can call a sustainability. This result that I show you to reflect this basically has never been anywhere. So meaning that before you carry out logging, you know already, number one, how much timber that you are going to get, how much damage that will incur, and what would be the growth before you decide on logging. Never happened before. So if you have this result, you can confidently say that, okay, this is the trees that I want to select to cut and to fell, and this would be my future forest. And I know that very well before I carry out the logging. Before I carry out logging, I know that which trees are going to fail, which trees are going to damage, and what would be the future growth. This is the thing that in what way that I can use my computers to decide on this. As I mentioned, we need to use a lot of AI approach and many other things. So there are techniques of using the IT in this kind of project. Okay, now we did develop this. I remember that doing this in under the World Bank project in Cambodia. Once we develop this, suddenly they say that they are not going to have a logging anymore. Okay, never mind. But what would be the benefit from the tree mapping technique? Number one, definitely you know the species diversity, and we know the forest. We know the forest, and we know a CITES. CITES, you don't know this. CITES is there is an act on the threatened species, trees and animals. So here trees. So if you have the inventory, you know that which species and so on. So there are certain species that you cannot fail against. This is wrong, right? You'll be charged if you fail certain trees that being threatened and so on. So, but by having this, you have the distribution, you have the database on this particular trees. Now, that finished first part.
Yeah.
Now I'm talking about second part.
The technology side.
Second part, very quickly. I'm using drone now. Now you go down the ground level. Now I'm using the drone level. People never used drone 10 years ago. Yeah, they of course they have a satellite, but satellite have many weaknesses. Yeah. So what we are doing at the moment is basically to review the crown, because we can identify the species based on the crown. The big trees, always the tallest trees. So we can basically predict basically the species on the top. Then by doing that, we can estimate how much timber that you can get. How much timber you can get. That's number one. Number two, later on I will explain. And later on, they are more than that. More than that. If you are talking about just purely timber, then of course this is good in the sense that when you fly, you can see which are the timber species, what would be the volume in future. Then you know that this area is good for timber timber logging concession. Now, then we say that can we identify the trees and can we identify the species? When we make presentation in many international forums, international, they say that this is probably the most difficult part in the world now, currently. And maybe this is very difficult, basically, in particular in the tropical forests. But we are making progress on this. We are making progress on this. And very soon, I think by next year, we can do the second part. Now we are doing the trees, and the second one is basically definitely by next year, we are going to have this. We can identify the species. And the meaning that the moment that we fly, we know that what are the species down there. What are the species down there. Now, this is basically many technique on the image processing to identify the trees and later on the species. These are all various techniques in terms of identification of trees, and there are many theorems to do that. And we are also using what they call the most popular technique now, deep learning. Deep learning, we learn from the current thousands of trees and so on. So we learn what are the model for this particular trees. And of course, we try to improve our prediction by using super resolution concept, proposed method for GAN and some other things. So meaning that basically we can improve the pixel one. We can extend the pixel. By doing that, we can improve the accuracy of our prediction. So by doing that, then we can predict our species more accurately, compared to the normal one. So we are developing this technique. Now we are successful in terms of identifying the trees, but very soon we are going to have more successful in terms of identification of the species. This is done by Haris. I think Sharon knows Haris. Okay, this is very technique. So what will be the impact? Very quickly, what will be the impact? Now, if we are successful at that, one of the limitations of our camera, we cannot penetrate this. We cannot go down to the ground because of the trees. Because of the trees. But if you fell the trees, by doing this, basically, we know the coordinate of that particular location everywhere. The one that can penetrate to the ground.
Yeah.
The one that penetrates to the ground, we know that what is the height. So we know the 3 dimensions, X, Y, and Z. We know this. Let's say, for example, we know this here. Anything that we can penetrate, we know the location. We know the location. We know the height. So if the tree grows, then we can estimate the growth of that particular tree. And that particular area, because we can estimate the height. We can estimate the height. We can estimate the height. Okay. That is our plan basically. It's not so much for artificial timber, but more on basically to make a survey using the drone in future. In future. So not much on the ground kind of inventory anymore. So we plan to use this as the second layer, second cycle, using the drone as the main tools to basically make inventory. No longer basically this, because by doing that we know, number one, we know the species and we know the size of that particular trees, because we know the ground. Because the moment that we get this, then definitely we can predict the height of that particular trees and make an estimate of the size of that particular trees, the timber part. So by doing that, then we can monitor for the next 30 years. Every year we can fly and we can estimate the size, the content, the stocking of our forest, of our
Yeah.
forest.
Can increase
Now,
the commodity value of the forest.
oh yes, sure. Yeah, because if we link that, if we know the species, we know that the price of the species, definitely we can put the value of that particular forest.
So then there will
Then,
be more budget for them to make sure they protect the forest.
oh
Because
yes,
there is a valuable
sure,
tree
sure.
that they are going to harvest in future.
Yes, yes. Now nobody knows what is inside the forest, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, nobody knows. But if you do this every year, every time, basically, you know that what is the value of your forest, your asset.
The assets.
Then you talk about facility management is a tool, but what are the assets? Now we know the asset. We use a drone and we know the asset.
Yeah.
And we need to have a technique. Our technology is a drone and technology of processing your data. And by doing that, then we know what would be the value of your asset. So that's why I said that the second cycle later on, we have far more information, great information, and nobody can compete us even at the global level. At the global level, okay. What can we learn? Okay. What can we learn? Okay, you said that half an hour. Okay, what can we learn? Quickly, yeah. All right. Okay, I'm computer scientist. I'm mathematician. I'm statistician. Okay, but I work in forestry. I work in economy. I work in climate change and so on. Basically, any field. I think even in future, you don't talk that you are what different field. No, no more. No more. In future, they are. You need to have a two integrated. You cannot just leave forestry to forestry alone.
Yeah.
You need to have a combination and integrated discipline. Because the thinking of forester may be different. Sure, different. So in order for you to move forward, I think you need to have a combination of a discipline. I'm lucky because I learn many things. I know Sharon also learn many things. So, but I learn many things. So by doing that, I can understand forestry. I can understand trade. I can understand value. I can understand computer. I know statistics and so on.
Yeah,
So
Prof.
IT complement forestry. And IT could add intelligent part. This is forestry. They don't understand the intelligent part. That's why different discipline is better. That's contribute to solving complex problems. I think when I joined forestry last time, they always say that, oh, forestry is very complicated. But I don't see that now. I see that it's more on interesting problem to solve.
Yeah.
Rather than a complicated one. So when they talk about complicated, they don't want to solve it. In my view, I should see this as far more interesting to solve. Far more. Now, just like I said, that they are far more interesting to solve. Just like tree mapping, nobody think about it. Nobody think about it. Nobody talk about the simulation for tree mapping one. Nobody. Even until now, nobody. So using drone, people using drone basically for simple things, to look for the border again, to look for the border, to have a management plan and so on. But nobody talk about the detailed part. How do you identify the trees and the species? How do you use drone for the forest survey? Nobody think about it. And you need to go detail in it. So that's why I mentioned that, of course, you need to learn many things. Of course, you need to learn many things. So by doing that, you put a lot of values on what you have learned. And you integrate your knowledge into something more cohesive, more integrated, and useful for future. So this is what we can learn from a combination of value discipline. Now, I would say that this, you talk about facility management. If you talk about this problem, you talk about how to maintain the drone, how to maintain the tractors, and many other things, and how to make sure that your asset is still valuable in future. But I always think that what will be the future is you need to continue improving. You always need to bring technologies from different disciplines. What we use for the drone basically is based on technologies of robotics, basically. Technology of robotics, basically. The one that we are using is more on the vision from the robotics. And we need to learn the new technologies and grab whatever opportunity that you have. to further improve your technology. So I would say this. Even though this is more on the facility management, last time when I talked about facility management, I remember what was the name of Akibat?
Yeah.
Akibas.
Year 2000, Prof. I mean, we started to identify what are the solutions for managing facility. I think that's where I know you in year 2000.
Yes, that's right. So, okay, but here we talk about the asset. If we talk about the asset, we talk about forest, how to make sure that your asset is sustainable. Sustainable. So in what way that? So it is not just equipment or tools, but you need to improve the new technology. So when I mentioned about the technique of tree mapping, when I mentioned about how to use the drone and new technologies together with the drone, if drone alone is not possible, current technology is not there. So you need to develop new technologies for you to basically identify the species, the trees, and so on. So that one basically in other disciplines. Now we talk about robotic, but here is not so much about robotic, but more the intelligent one. So more to it. So I would say that for the facility management, even for facility management system, you need to introduce or you need to use the intelligent part. I'm sure that you have all these application of AI to control and so on. So you need to use it in what way that you can make sure that this system will give you a lot more values in future, sustainable future. So you change things. So like here, what I would say that we change the technique. We entirely change the technique. Different paradigm, change the technique. Change the way that you process, not only the process, you make a decision also is different. Just like you using the new technique, new change, new method, and so on. Just like you change from using Kodak and using film, you use a digital. So we are talking about digital forestry now. So this is what I would say for my talk today. So thank you very much. It's the 7:45. Sorry, I think half an hour.
Oh, it's okay. It's nice.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, all right. Thank you very much. Yeah. So that is my talk.
Okay, guys.
Session. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. I think what Prof mentioned is that what we want to bring to the table here is that I mean, it's whatever we do, you know. So whatever technology that we have, if we don't want to change ourselves to adopt the technology and to change the way we do business in managing facility or in construction, you know, and we are going to be left behind. I mean, so why we bring Prof here, because the journey that he actually involved in talking about IT since 1990s until now, I think the revolution of technology that has been used and managing the difficult parts of the world, which is forest, by utilizing the technology also can be done. So when we talk about, we are in the construction industry or we are in the facility management industry, we are in the city. So if we can't do anything, we can't change things that how we want to manage our facility. I think it's quite embarrassment to the people that involved in managing forests. They also utilizing the technology to keep our sustainability, to keep our forests, our assets, our nation assets more valuable compared to we are managing other people's assets if we are not adopting to this digital era. So I think we need to do something about it. Okay, so we are open for any questions. So we have another 15 minutes to entertain any question and answers. That if anybody would like to raise a question, so feel free to chat. Any question, guys? To ask Prof, because his his experience is not talking about managing forests in Malaysia, but we're talking about managing forests in the nationwide. I mean, in the United Nations. We talk about not just forests in Malaysia, but talk about United Nations and talk about the technology over there during those days that we introduced in the US, and it's been led by Malaysians. So, guys, any question? So how we want to blend through the way we managing facility, compare that what Prof did in managing forest. Any questions for Prof or
any general question?
any general question? Yeah, please feel free to ask, because this session is actually you can ask anything related to. I mean, Prof also expert on managing facility. So he also introduced how we should manage facility using the digital tools those days in year 2000. In year 2000, when we talk about the first design and build project on developing a campus, that we need to use a digital FM those days in year 2000. I think before we talk about the beam, before we talk about any application, now, but he started to embark or introduce this kind of concept in managing in utilizing the technology in managing the facility or managing the assets of the. I remember that we did together to design the campus. I think 3,000 building campus in somewhere in Puncak Alam. I think we did the activities. I think a couple of years. So, and it's of course one of the success story that we managed to table it in the US, I think in 2007, if I'm mistaken, and won an award of the total infrastructure facility management solution that we introduced in managing facility in, if I'm mistaken, in 2007 in Washington. Right? Any question? Okay. There is one question. In your opinion, do you think there is a traditional process or procedure that is better left as it is without going through a digitalization? Okay. So there is a question here. In your opinion, do you think there is traditional process or procedure that is better left as it is without going through digitalization?
I cannot think of, but maybe unless you give me some example, for example.
Yeah.
So otherwise I cannot. Maybe there are possibilities. Because for example, like which is not true. I think I experienced all over the world about this traditional knowledge. For example, you talk about traditional knowledge of people all over the world. So in 1995, I was responsible for managing all this what they call a traditional knowledge.
Yeah.
But they want to retain this kind of technology. Yes, they wanted to retain the technology, but still, basically, this technology at the end they are being influenced by the current development. For example, just like we are using acak kayu, for example. Believe me, when they started Tongkat Ali, I remember I was in Frame. Raden Supatan at the time. When they introduced Tongkat Ali, dia pakai tarik-tarik tu apa? Jadi serbuk. And then digenam dalam air, you minum. But of course, things are changing. And now, my colleague in Frame now developing a new technology to extract the Tongkat Ali. So there is a change. That's number one. Number two, the traditional biochemists talking about the ball and so on to indicate the molecules. But I was involved in basically to work on the protein structure, DNA structure prediction. So we don't talk about this. Sure, we need to use the digital one, the digital technology, because that could speed up a lot of things. That number one, they can do a lot of complicated things and so on. So probably at the moment we talk about the nostalgia things, to retain certain things on certain part. But definitely the overall, you need to change it in the sense that basically you need to be basically influenced by the current development. Current development.
Yeah. There is one question, another question from Muhammad Alfif. How far the technology will impact the forest sustainability? Are they towards machine learning and artificial intelligence?
Okay, as I mentioned to you, the whole thing that I was talking about is basically there is the artificial intelligence. There is the artificial intelligence. So we are introducing, but artificial intelligence itself is a technique. Just a technique, just like you learn statistics. You learn statistics, you learn statistical analysis, the same thing that we talk about the deep learning and so on. This is just a technique.
Okay.
But you need to put your brain there, your ideas, your technique, and make use of the technology and the knowledge. So knowledge itself, just like technique itself, deep learning and so on, you have to manage technique. You learn probability, you learn artificial intelligence. This is just a technique. But how do you make use of that technology? How do you adopt the technology? How do you adapt the technology? Yeah? And how do you make use of that technology in a better way? That is the challenge. That is the real one. That is the real one. So basically, definitely in the world in future, sure, the technology will be there. IT technology will always be there and will lead the process in future.
Okay, I think this Saiful Bahari asking, I think I can answer it. Okay. Is there any building FST had implemented BIM for FM in Malaysia? Yes, Mr. Saiful, there is few projects that already implemented BIM for FM, especially that for the, I think the earlier one is the BIM for FM in Kementerian Wilayah buildings. That is year 2010. That is the earlier one, BIM for FM. But then, of course, at that time is not talking about the utilizing BIM for construction, but we're talking about BIM that we are building back the models. I mean, rebuild back the building by using the BIM or by using the Revit. It's like what we did. We utilizing the concept of the building up Sydney Opera House. So we demonstrate it to develop or to build up the Ministry of Federal, which is located in Putrajaya, and we rebuild the building, the models from the 3D perspective, and then adopting the FM to it inside that. And recently, when we did we involved in the project of development of Parcel F, so whereby there is a BIM for construction, and then we extend whatever that been utilized in the BIM for construction to work for FM. So that's the first project ever been implemented currently from the construction utilizing BIM, designing BIMs, and then for FM, and now currently being utilized. And then there will be more building coming out soon. They are implementing BIM, and then they are moving towards for FM. Implemented like maybe like Menara Warisan. So they also utilizing BIM, and now they are moving towards for FM. The Tun Razak Exchange building also is part of parcel that building up the BIM model, and now towards to the utilizing the BIM models for FM. I think there's few more building in towns, and then not only that, JKR also implemented for the hospital project work BIM for FM. Few university also having that. So there is a lot, but you need to identify, you need to go deeper how they want to implement it, because they got many ways. Yeah, you need to contact the respective building owner, like the Prime Minister departments, because they own the buildings, or maybe the PUNB, maybe the Menara Warisan, they currently implemented. So this can be contacted. Yeah, it's possible. Okay, Prof, I have one more question related to we talk about big data. Okay, this is something like, and we in the managing facility and asset, they also have a big data. And when you talk about forestry, when you talk about the species, so you start managing more big data coming out. I mean, it's not just numbers of species, but towards the bigger big data that you are going to face. So what is your plan on that?
Okay, one example about big data is basically when you start using the deep learning one. Deep learning, for example, deep learning basically require thousands of data to create a model. Require thousands of data to create a model. So definitely this kind of technology require a lot of learning experience. So that's what we call it deep learning. That's what they call it deep learning. So they require a lot of data. Then number one, so of course, mostly you talk about the 1 hectare could have maybe more than 100,000 data. For example, I can say that above 10 centimeter and above, probably about 400 something. But the smaller one, below 10 centimeter diameter, maybe few thousand. That's why we might have 100,000 per hectare. If you want to basically to store this kind of information, is a lot. So 4C definitely require a lot more big data. That number one. Number two, if you are monitoring, for example, if you carry out logging, what would be the impact of river, for example?
Okay.
So when you put your machine there, your human there, they will give you all the information
Yeah.
every second.
Yeah.
But itself is a big data. So
Yes.
you need to have a technology for the big data. How do you basically analyze the data? How do you store the data? How do you process the data? And so on. Definitely, the current technology, just like calculation term of statistical analysis, need to be changed.
Yeah.
Need to be changed. So there are new kind of technique to analyze this particular data. How do you basically, when you talk about sensor things, how do you basically analyze this kind of data? How do you store the data? You cannot just simply use that big data.
Yeah.
So you need to have a new technology to do that. So basically, forcing definitely you talk about the big data.
Yeah.
And of course, the new kind of calculation is also could be different. That's why when you talk about normally we talk about the probabilistic statistical analysis. That's why we are using deep learning, because deep learning talk about some entirely different things. They talk about the real data and big amount of data. Compare the normal statistical analysis that use the average one, average variance and so on. So things are different between these technologies.
Maybe also in the managing facility also, because our data, for example, one building that consume about 100,000 of assets, talk about when we inventorize one building, when utilizing the BIM, we managed to inventorize like how many assets they have. So we reach to the like one building per story, they have like 100,000 of data assets. And the asset have a life cycle, and somebody need to do this analysis, and cannot be the same statistic analysis. I think, I agree that we need also to talk about the deep learning element involved on the managing the life cycle of the assets, because it's similar to what you did it for forestry. This is life assets, because it's growth. Meanwhile, in the managing facility, the asset is not growth. Maybe they are not. They are die off, but how can we prolong the asset, for example? How can we identify? Because I believe that not many of the people analyze this data that they have to prolong the asset life cycle, except utilizing rule of thumb, statistical kind of concept, instead of go for deep learning. So I think we need to change the way we do things, especially when we enter.
A lot of technology been using a sensor base. When you talk sensor base, you just imagine the amount of data that they send. So definitely they require different kind of assessment and analysis. Definitely. Because now you talk about the real big data, basically because we talk about not only the volume, but the speed.
The pattern, the speed, the behavior. So I think it's already 9 o'clock. So guys, any more last question? Any last question for the prof here, for the prof Roslan? So, and meanwhile, there is a form, a feedback form, in order to get a certification. It's being posted in the chat. So please feel free to fill the forms in order for you to claim the CPD point and also a certification from the CIDB. So if there is no more questions, because it's already 9, we would like to wrap out. So Prof, any last word from you? Anything that you want to add before we end the session?
Okay, I would say that basically in future, the new generation, you can see that the new generation now, they adopt the IT. Their life. Of course, I just give you 40 years ago, the technology 40, 50 years ago, using the punch card, you don't feel it. And imagine that WhatsApp is only maybe 10 years ago. Even it started with the text, push bell and so on. But now, nobody basically think that this is new technology. So that's why I think basically the new generation need to start promoting how to make use of this new technology. Just like a police, for example, police still, kalau apa you buat report, still they use report in kertas.
Yeah.
In paper, kan? Careful nowadays, everyone having telephone. Why did you just send apa dia? You send that report to the phone, for example, or through WhatsApp and so on. Nowadays, people know that if you contact overseas, you can use a WhatsApp telephone. It's for free now. So, meaning that basically there are new systems in future that will be far more effective, far more efficient, and cheaper. So, better grab that opportunity. So when you develop this, either facility management, so to incorporate all this new technology into your work. So that is my view. My
Okay.
last word.
Thank you, Prof. It's like we already covered everything. Thank you, Prof. So raise again the tradition. So you can see the raise again tradition from the forestry also. They are actually moving from the tradition towards now a new way of doing things. So, and of course, more things are coming. More technology are coming to help out us on managing our assets, like what Prof mentioned. The tree is our nation assets. It's very important. And okay, before we end the webinar session, participant, please take a few moments, fill in the feedback form to obtain a CCD and CPD point from CIDB. The link for the feedback form already been posted in the chat box session. And great, and thank you everyone. Thank you to CIDB on organizing or making this webinar a success. We appreciate your being here. Thank you, Prof, for your time. I know that you are very busy now, and then more projects related to forestry are coming. So congratulations. And I think that's all from me. And Assalamualaikum and good night.